Welcome everybody to the first ever episode of Vibez From The Void, where we discuss all things mythology, folklore, occult, and paranormal. I am here today, your host, Brandon, aka Doc Appleby, with my good friend, Derek Zombeard Hobson.
Hey everyone, how's it going?
Now, I do want to start the first show with kind of a disclaimer and just let everybody know right off the bat that we are not experts on any of this. We're just kind of, armchair scholars, mythology enthusiasts, and we are probably the farthest thing from an expert. All I really have is my general independent research on these topics. So if I'm wrong about anything, feel free to let me know, but you don't have to be a dick about it.
Oh yeah, if I'm wrong about anything, don't tell me about it. Ignorance is bliss. I don't want to know. I'm just a nerd who likes reading and listening to stuff.
Just just keep your facts to yourself.
Yeah, I care more about my feelings than your facts, buddy.
Oh man. So in true form with the name of the show, today we are discussing creatures from the void or the abyss. Specifically, I've got some serpentine gods I want to talk about. This is consistently a recurring theme and character in mythology from all over the world. They're range anywhere from gods of creation to agents of chaotic destruction, and these are a major role in the mythology and cultures of many, many past civilizations. There are even some spiritual movements that are alive and well today that acknowledge or worship or venerate or fear these particular kinds of creatures.
Yeah, I'm one of them because I hate snakes. So yeah.
Why is there a snake in the podcast?
Get these motherfucking snakes out my motherfucking podcast.
So, first in the lineup is a heavy hitter, and from one of the oldest recorded civilizations on Earth, we have Tiamat from the Babylonian pantheon. And Tiamat was presented as having kind of a dual nature. She was not only what was later this monstrous serpent, she was a goddess of creation. And she gave birth to the first generation of deities who then conspired to kill their father and her lover, Apsu, in an attempt to usurp his throne and his power. And that was a huge fuck up on their part. Tiamat did take that personally, and she assumed the form of a giant sea serpent and subsequently rained her fury down upon her ungrateful and frankly kind of dick-headed offspring.
Yeah, that's not great.
Not for them, it wasn't.
No, not at all. Tiamat is a very interesting figure in history and in pop culture today, even.
Yeah, I did want to kind of cut into that. Tiamat has been featured in specifically Dungeons and Dragons is what I want to bring up as a character. Or what is she in that? Is she like a big bad?
She's a god in Faerun Forgotten Realms lore, which is like one of the official worlds of Dungeons and Dragons by Wizards of the Coast. Tiamat is a chaotic, evil goddess who is the queen of dragons, and she's represented as a five-headed dragon, each with each head being one of the five different chromatic dragon colors: red, black. Let me do this in, I guess, Magic the Gathering order: white, blue, black, red, and green.
Okay. And now in that respect, is like in the D&D verse, is she like something that could, let's say, like a warlock could be aligned with?
Yeah, she could be a patron deity of a warlock. She could be the deity worshipped by a cleric or paladin, even. As long as it's within the cleric's domain, I guess, and to speak in players' terms of D&D. I actually just started a cleric, but not one that worships Tiamat. But there are some actually famous examples of worshippers of Tiamat in D&D. Actually, Joe Manganiello famously has a character named Archon the Cruel, who is a follower of Tiamat and whose basically mission in life is to free her from her prison in wherever she's imprisoned, because I don't remember.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is that like a pocket dimension or like in a side reality?
I think she's either in the Nine Hells or the Plane of Fire. Either one of those is like just kind of another plane of existence, as they call it, and it's interesting. Kind of layered type of multiverse type thing.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, yeah. Anyway, so that's kind of an example that a lot of these mythological beings and gods and creatures can still be relevant today, even in popular culture, even aside just from outside of their own mythology. But so anyway, yeah, Tiamat, her husband was slain. She was pissed off at her children, and one of she gives birth subsequently to these 11 like monster gods, or you could call them titans. But they're generally regarded, as a rule, they were all dragons. I think is what the idea that they present there.
It's possible.
And one of these monster gods, named Kingu, was entrusted as Tiamat's new lover and guardian of the Tablet of Destinies, which gives the owner and the wielder the title of God of Gods, or the Supreme God. And so, as this conflict rage on, Tiamat is eventually slain, funnily enough, by one of her other children, one of the prime generation of gods. It was the storm god. His name was Marduk. And he was quoted to, he was reported to have wielded, quote, arrows of wind, a net, a club, and an invincible spear, which is something I do kind of want to touch on, just as another recurring theme throughout different mythologies from different civilizations around the world, is the hero that wields that magic item.
Yeah, like the either as a literal weapon or even just as like a sort of metaphorical key to defeating whatever it is they're facing. What am I thinking of? Genji's. I think there's a shield that Genji has in like Japanese mythology. I could be totally off base on that. I don't know. But yeah, there's a lot of different interpretations of that theme throughout all of it.
I mean, obviously, one of the more popular ones, especially was, and we're actually about to talk about some more Norse mythology, but one of the most popular ones, obviously, being Thor's hammer, Mjolnir.
Yeah.
Or like, say, Excalibur, that belonged to King Arthur, and ultimately it's kind of cool because that, as you put it, is that item or that quality that the hero has is ultimately what leads them to be victorious in facing down their enemies and their opposition.
Yeah.
So, yeah, Marduk, storm god, slays Tiamat, and from her body and blood, the heavens, the stars, the earth, mountains, and oceans were formed. So, in that aspect, I mean, through her death, ultimately, she became a creator goddess again in the end. So, this is kind of similar. Her being slain by a storm god is similar to, in Norse mythology, we have the myth of the world serpent, whose proper name is Jormungandr, which, and I did practice this all day, so I didn't butcher it. According to the internet, so take that with a grain of salt, the proper pronunciation is Jormungandr. So, there's the Midgard serpent, the world serpent, Jormungandr. He encircles the world, he grasps his own tail in his jaws, obviously forming the all-important symbol of the Ouroboros, which is a symbol of death and rebirth, or reincarnation, or new life coming from destruction.
Yeah, the life cycle.
Yeah. And this does tie into also the cyclical nature of Norse mythology. So it starts with kind of, in the beginning, you have Odin and the gods and everything's created. And then throughout that, it all culminates in Ragnarok, which is the apocalypse, if you will. And we're going to touch on that. But after Ragnarok, after the end of the world, or the apocalypse, the god Balder is reborn and steps up and takes Odin's mantle, and the whole story basically starts all over again.
Yeah. It invokes the cyclical nature of not only the myths, but also just like possibly even the way people viewed life, then how everything is a cycle. Like, it just, yeah. Cycles.
I got you. Cycles. So, the Ouroboros. So, anyway, similar to the story of Tiamat, Jormungandr is the arch nemesis of Thor, who's the god of storms, thunder, lightning, all that good shit. And there are three major myths, or like greatest hits, of Thor versus Jormungandr. And so in the first, it's often referred to, the story is often referred to as lifting the cat. In this tale, Thor encounters Skrymir, who's the king of the giants, right? He challenges Thor to complete different feats, not unlike the feats of Hercules in Greek mythology. And one of these challenges is to lift the world serpent while it's disguised as an enormous cat. And Thor is only able to raise the cat, air quotes there, high enough to lift one of its paws off the ground. Though it is said in the story that if he had managed to raise the entire cat from the ground, then it would have shifted the boundaries of the entire universe. So, probably not great.
Probably not great.
The second major story featuring Jormungandr and Thor, we have Thor going on a fishing trip with his good buddy, the giant Hymir. And while fishing, Thor accidentally hooks the serpent and pulls him to the surface of the ocean. They face off in an epic battle, and just as Thor takes up Mjolnir to slay this big-ass snake, his buddy Hymir cuts Thor's line, freeing Jormungandr to sink back to his original position encircling Midgard. Because if Jormungandr dies, it pretty much is the end of the world as we know it.
Yeah, similar to
the REM song.
Well, that not only that, but similar to the previous story where, had Thor succeeded, things would have been not good for the world, which I guess speaks partly to not interrupting the cycle, and
I didn't even think about that.
Yeah,
that's a good point.
Speaks to and let things come as they go. Like you can't change everything.
Yeah, that's almost like Taoist, and shit happens, so just watch it happen and don't interfere.
Yeah, I wouldn't take it that extreme. That seems borderline nihilistic at times, but yeah.
Okay. Well, there's some common ground there anyway.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so the third and arguably the most important myth featuring Jormungandr is that of Ragnarok, aka the apocalypse that we touched on earlier. So in this traditional telling of the story, one of the major omens of Ragnarok, or the end of the world, is the seas and the oceans being in just cataclysmic unrest, as Jormungandr releases his tail from his mouth and emerges from the water, and subsequently the tides flood the entire planet.
Oh, more flood myths. Cool.
Yeah, right. Well, and I didn't even think about that when we were talking about this earlier, but that's kind of cool that you see the Great Flood, that legend rearing its head in this instance.
Yeah. Rather far away from the Middle East, where a lot of these stories originate. It's weird that, not necessarily weird, but it's very interesting that like Norse mythology has a lot thematically in common with more Middle Eastern religions, with like the storm god fighting the serpent, and flood myth, and well, I guess not so much flood myth, but like a great flood being part of the destruction of the world, so to speak.
Right, and that's the thing with, and that kind of comes back to the cyclical thing.
Yeah.
Is even in like the Christian myth of the Great Flood, it was a starting over point. It's a rebirth and a new era coming from this destructive, cataclysmic event.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So, anywho, in Ragnarok, Thor is prophesied to face off against Jormungandr, and ultimately he does end up being victorious. However, despite slaying the world serpent in their battle, Thor is bitten, and the venom from the world serpent ultimately ends up causing him to die at the end of the battle after walking 9 paces, and he falls over dead from the poison, pretty much, or the venom, whatever.
Venom.
Yes, snake venom. So, and I mentioned this. I mentioned this earlier before we started recording today. That it's funny that Thor must be an absolute unit, because he gets bit by this snake that presumably has teeth that are the size of mountains, and that's totally fine. Like, he's just, oh fuck it, I'll walk that off. But no, the poison is what gets him.
Yeah, it's always interesting to hear like, oh, Thor, or the hero of the story fights this gigantic serpent dragon thing, and it's like, oh, okay, but like, didn't you say that like that snake like encircled the world? That's it's pretty big, guys. Just saying.
Yeah. So, and then, and again, in a similar vein, you have a storm god or a sky god that faces off against a great serpent or a great dragon in Hindu mythology. So you have the Hindu god Indra, who's the god of storms, battling the great dragon Vritra, who is an antagonist to the prosperity and happiness of mankind. So he's very, very much an adversarial type of deity or being. And then in the same region, there is the ever popular, and you didn't think we were going to get all the way through this without bringing up Egyptian mythology.
Oh yeah, no, there's no way.
So in that same area, like Middle Eastern region, there's the Egyptian pantheon that's just like filled with fascinating deities and myths, and there's a whole lot of that. I'm sure we'll probably bring that up in later episodes. But you have I want to touch on the god Apophis, also known as Apep, who he actually, this is funny because he did not fight the god of storms. He is the god of storms.
Yeah, storms, chaos, darkness.
And so according to Egyptian mythology, Apophis has always existed. So he's always been around, and he swam in the dark waters of, quote, undifferentiated chaos.
The primordial sea.
Yeah.
Which is, very... I don't know, I always find it interesting that, like, a lot of these ancient religions will reference what is essentially the primordial sea, which was, really a real thing that, like, all of life on Earth is born from. It's just really weird that this intense scientific fact that takes a lot of scientific knowledge to, like, know about shows up as a mythological thing in ancient history.
Your point is taken, but the show is about mythology. You can get out of here with that science shit, you fucking nerd.
Well, I mean, okay.
No, it's true though. It is funny because like it took like so many like thousands of years for scientists to come to this conclusion, and it was like so simply presented in myths from ages past, which is neat. So anyway, Apophis is he was a chaotic god swimming in the primordial sea, or
Yeah.
the dark waters of chaos. And once creation was begun, Apophis was pretty fucking mad about that. Because the introduction of duality and order just totally rubbed him the wrong way. So prior to creation, everything was a unified whole, but afterward, there are opposites or polar opposites, such as water and land, light and dark, male and female. And Apophis didn't like any of this. He was having none of it.
Yeah, he was like, "Hey, turn the light off."
He just wants to sleep and swim in darkness.
Yeah.
So anyway, ultimately, Apophis did become the enemy of the sun god Ra, because the sun was the first sign of the created world and symbolized divine order, light, life, all the things Apophis hates. And so he figured if he could swallow the sun god, he could return the world to a unity of darkness. Which is actually kind of funny that's his goal, because he's not a dragon, but Fenrir, or Fenris from Norse mythology, in Ragnarok, that's one of the major things that happens, is Fenris devours the sun.
Yeah. It's funny that you say he's not a dragon, because he is definitely a like proto dragon. But like he's not like what we would consider a modern dragon by any means, but he definitely as well as Tiamat and some of the other gods that we've talked about are uh, realistically dragons before like our modern interpretation of dragons. It's like what evolved, so to speak, into being what we call a dragon. But no, he is basically always represented as just a gigantic snake. A little more so than Tiamat or Jorgamander is. Apep is usually depicted as like very boa constrictor like almost in all the interpretations I've seen.
Okay. Huh. I didn't know that. See, because, like, I'm over here thinking, like, the Middle East. I'm picturing, like, a giant frickin' cobra or something.
Yeah, I guess more of like an adder, but like very like usually you'll see him with like spots, which to me speaks in my head says boa constrictor, but that's not necessarily true. But definitely has a very more of a snake-like feel than some of the others who are typically presented as like sea serpents.
Well, I did have there was actually one more that's a major one that I did want to touch on, and this is that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode, that there are spiritual and religious movements that are out there today that are still alive and well, that actually worship, some of these deities, and the most important one that immediately comes to mind is Damballa, which is the serpent god of creation.
Yeah.
From Voodoo, Louisiana voodoo, hoodoo, a number of other African diasporic religions. And I can't speak on this again with any kind of authority, because it's anybody knows who has studied or read into voodoo, hoodoo, that it's a very closed tradition. So the knowledge that is available to the public about the religion and the myths that surround it are that information's pretty limited.
Yeah, it's the one that I definitely know the least about. I pretty much know the Wikipedia article on Damballa, which is pretty sparse. But it was definitely also the most interesting one that I read about in preparation for this. Definitely very, very interesting. I like a lot of the themes of it. I like. It's very interesting and striking to me that like white is like the color that identifies with him, or them. I guess I think I don't remember how it's presented. I think male, but it's a deity, so them, I guess. Either way, it was really interesting that like when offerings are made to Damballa, they're usually things that are white, like foods that are white or flowers, and like the highest, supposedly the highest like offering to offer the Damballa is like a pile of flour with a white egg on top, and I was like, that's weird, but I really like it because I really like pastries. So I feel that.
So, like, I mean, it makes you wonder, though. Like, so what if you just made, like, dough?
Yeah, just like here's some dough. It's like, nope, that's not what I want. I wanted the dry flour with just a whole white egg in shell. You messed it up, buddy.
Have
But
you
this is so delicious though.
have you seen the episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia where Frank is making a sandwich in his mouth? Like he's
No.
just like eating like putting a bunch of different like meats and cheeses in his mouth. He's like, oh, I'm making a sandwich in my mouth, so now I can't help but think like Dambala's like making loaves of bread in his stomach with the egg and the flour.
Dumballa's Bakery.
But Damballa actually has some in common with Apophis or Apep, because he's something that's always been around. He laid beneath the earth, giant giant snake, protecting it from the falling watery abyss below, is what the legend says. And although he laid still for a long time, eventually he did have to move. So him moving raised mountains, created valleys, shook stars up into the sky. Quote, sacred waters were released, forming oceans, rivers, springs, and streams. And so when the first rain began to fall, and I'm going to butcher this, I have no idea how to pronounce it, so I'm just going to go for it. Idohuedo and the guise of the first rainbow appeared, and Damballa and Idohuedo fell deeply in love, and they remain in love to this day.
Aww.
And the intensive, all-pervasive power of their love is what infiltrated the entire universe. And so you have, I guess probably for the first time out of what we've discussed today, you have a snake that is a god of creation and is also seen as a very benevolent creature.
Yeah. Well, I don't know about the god of like. I guess Tiamat being used for creation. Yeah. I guess you're right. I would say most of them are involved in the creation myths, but this is definitely more of benevolent is definitely correct. Them being more of a revered rather than necessarily feared kind of figure that like created, like actually created what we know as the Earth, and just just very interesting iconography and just the whole. It's definitely the most different of all of them, which I think speaks to a lot to how civilization itself kind of manifested.
Right, because typically a lot of this, what we've seen, is obviously these creatures being demonized, and even like, so typically, and I mean, I can blame a lot of this on Christian mythology. Typically, serpents or snakes are seen as, I mean, negative things. A lot of the imagery you see surrounding them and the legends you see surrounding them are just typically not great.
Yeah, the snake in the garden, the Leviathan, which is another like storm god versus the serpent myth when Yahweh fights Leviathan, but
Right. And it's funny you bring that up, because that actually leads me to an excellent point to segue. We are pretty much about out of time today, but Speaking of Leviathan and creatures that come from, the abyss and beside reality, I am actually, in the next episode, I plan to talk about cosmic horror and eldritch beings. So there's going to be a lot of Lovecraft in there.
Nice.
But I want to thank everybody for joining us today. Thank you, Derek.
Oh yeah, thanks for having me.
For coming in. I really appreciate your input. Hopefully you guys all enjoyed yourselves, and you're going to come along for this ride, and you'll tune into the next episode. So, fare thee well, Voyagers. This has been the first episode of Vibes from the Void, and is a long way from being the last.